My name's Kevin. My research question is how do we use multi-criteria analysis to prioritise brownfield sites for redevelopment? A bit of background for Auckland. In the last 30 years, our population grew about 600,000, with dwelling increase about 220,000. As of the 2013 census, we got about 1.44 million population, with dwelling just over 500,000. But some sources are saying, even though we got over 500,000 dwellings, we still haven't got enough. We still have a shortfall of about 15 to 30,000 dwellings. What the council is doing is they're freeing up greyfield sites as well as brownfield sites and underutilising sites for these special housing areas. That's freeing about 1,000 hectares to build about 13,000 dwellings. Currently, the urban build-up area is at about 55,000 hectares. The council, to future-proof this growth, the unitary plan has put away 23,000 hectares. If we look at that, the tan is the current build-up, and the green is the proposed build-up with the metro urban limit. If we fast forward that 30 years, the projected population will be 2.2 million. And if we, with the current situation of the housing, the way they look at it, say 3 per dwelling, we will need about 250,000 more dwellings. That in terms will be about 19,000 hectares of the reserve land. So what we've got left is about 3,000 to 4,000 hectares to play with in the next 30 years. So as a way of resilient use of land, we need to look at another way of future-proofing it. Otherwise, we're going to get a worse housing crisis in the next cycle. As landscape architects, we can look at it before it becomes a problem, and that is by consolidating the urban core, by maximising the underutilised land in the urban setting right now, and we revitalise greyfield and brownfield sites. Working with Babbage will be look at the current development, identify the grey and brownfield sites, and then see if there's any development potentials or ecological potentials or both, and then evaluate it with a weighting system or some kind. So what is brownfield site? Brownfield site is a underutilised industrial or commercial sites that may be or may not be contaminated, and it can be reused after remediation, or some, they call it greyfield, as you can just reuse without any remediation. So what is brownfield redevelopment? It is changing from one use to another, say industrial or commercial to housing or mixed use. Why brownfield redevelopment? It improves local ecology by removing actual or potential hazards or pollutants from this area. It improves health and well-being, as well as property values, by recovering and returning to a more desirable site or to that neighbourhood. It also increases the land use sustainability by reducing the urban sprawl, preserve a little bit more greenfield. Before we expand into greenfield, we use these first, and increase the efficiency of infrastructure. How do we approach it? Brownfield sites, you normally have a lot of stakeholders, such as the owner, sometimes the council, the neighbourhood, and sometimes may even be the environmentalists. So everyone has their own point of view, agendas, wants and needs. So these factors must be considered and also be resolved before we can actually develop the site. So feedback from the candidate workshop is a weighted multi-attribute approach to this. This weighted multi-approach is actually what they use multi-criteria analysis in a different discipline. It's a part of the operational research that deals with advanced analytical methods to help decision making. That is something similar to a expert system or decision support system. Why use this MCDA? As we know, sustainability is part of the 3 pillars of the society, which is social, environmental, and economical. So multi-criteria can go into each of them and compare and contrast to get anything that's common for this sustainable. And it's been used for pure academic discussions, such as landscape assessment, land use, for things such as predictive movement of, what do you call it? Sorry. It's used for predictive the movement of the. Sorry. I'll just take a break. For growth pattern, sorry. For a predictive growth pattern. And as a multi-criteria spatial support, it's used for site selection as well as things like network analysis. For site selection, it's things like brownfield site, large industrial sites such as the Think Big projects, that type of large industrial. That also includes the energy plants and all that. Landfill sites, aquifer recharge, and even highway runoffs to get an optimum site for these. Network analysis is things like the current transport network, future transport network, and wastewater network system, that kind of thing. This is a few case studies of how it's used in the field. This is in London. That's one of the first use of GIS for brownfield redevelopment. They create a network analysis of the public transport system, and then they get their data of the brownfield sites, and from there they overlay it to create a spatial database. This one is a solar and wind farm in Colorado. They use spatial analysis of all the constraints, such as distance from the city, population density, and all those. And then they use the spatial representation of wind and solar of that area, and then they measure it together and weight it, sum up to get a site evaluation. Sometimes you don't always get a good site, so there might be a chance that you need optimization. Here is what some of them use with some genetic algorithm to do the optimization. What it does is through a multiple iteration, it drops off any redundant attributes and takes up a new relevant attribute. So for each iteration, it gives you a better value till you get to a goal of what you want. Maybe not be 100%, but something like 80, 90%. And that can be shown with something like this, how like human creating a parcel or you put it through the system. This is another one of land use plan of before and after, where it's not using spatial objective and using a spatial objective, how the pattern will change. So the next case study, this is almost what I want to do with my research. It uses an expert system as well as the decision support system. What it does is it uses what they call a Delphi system to create surveys and questionnaires to ask experts about their opinions on the criteria, to get a weighting on that criteria, and then through a multiple approach, as in they ask them over and over again to get a finer or more accurate value of that weighting, and then they put it through that as a percentage. So, and then what they do after that is they put it through a decision system, support system, and to get a weighting of the value on that side. And then with that weighting, then they create the GIS maps that we see in case 2, and to get a better site selection. The problem with expert system is sometimes it takes a lot longer to perform, because the experts, sometimes they might not want to participate, and sometimes they just they throw it out, or they doesn't give you that real information. So that is it's good, but not always good. In some cases, it's good like when it's the project is big, massive, that almost half the country wants to get involved, that kind of thing. But if it's a small project, then it's a waste of people's time. So in summary of what they've been using is that Delphi system is that expert system. Analytical is a pairwise system that after they get any value, they compare each criteria and then you normalize it to get your value. And then genetic algorithm is to optimize anything. So this is some of the literatures that I looked at, and most of them, they use spatial analysis, which is we're using GIS and all that, and they use a different form of MCDA for whether it's decision support or expert to get their things. So what I want to do is to have a spatial process for what I'm doing, as well as a weighting process, so that criteria comes in, and that criteria is probably just me or someone else is going to use that system, because they can set up what is more important and what is less important, and that comes into for the weighting as well as the spatial. So spatial will be my database. Weighting is just a calculation of something like 0.3 to 0.4 or something like that, and then it goes through the output, and anything. If it's okay, we'll take that. If it's not, we'll go through an optimization, or even that doesn't work, then we'll start again. So what I want to do is something that is more robust, not just a single use, so that it's a toolbox, more like a toolbox with a database that I can use it for. Today it could be just a brownfield site, maybe tomorrow it could be a ecological site that I want to do. For the spatial process, it's basically two processes. One is the network analysis that we saw in case 1, and the other one is the spatial analysis that we saw in case 2. For network analysis, it's creating network with the nodes, and then you create the surface area to get your proximity. as a pure data set, and then that comes to spatial analysis. With those information, you set out what you want to do as an opportunity, and then overlay those as constraints. So that we will get a rough idea of what we're wanting, and then with that we'll bring out the second part of the calculation of the weighting process of where the criteria match against each other so that we can get the possible sites, and then later on, and then that is a matrix value where they compare against each other, and then later on we'll normalize it so that it's never more than 1, or the whole column equal to 1. So with that, that will be put together and to get an anticipated outcome like this, so that you click on the parcel, it'll give you a value, and so on. So what is next is, this is my literature review workshop. So the next is to collect data, data analysis, and also the integration. So that's the stuff that I've talked about in the next 6 months.
Sorry, supervisor, but just to make it clear that what he wants to do is to make like an inventory of all of the brownfields in Auckland, and to see what potential they have for redevelopment or for ecology or both. So that's
fantastic.
So he's not planning to test any kind of design solution in one of those brownfields. Yeah. Sorry. Well, thank you for that.
So that's in the presentation, yeah, and we'll say thank you, and Bruno.
Thank you for that. I think you were a bit nervous. There was no need for that. We don't bite. Maybe we do sometimes. I think it was a very interesting idea that you have there to map all the brownfields and see the potential for redevelopment. I think it's something that we tend to ignore, and there is a huge need to look at that. I think that all the methods that you went through was very interesting. It's really out of my comfort zone. It's very mechanized, which I think that, it has positive and negative stuff, as any other method. So while you were presenting, I think that you have a very good couple of ideas there. It would probably be better you define all those concepts of resiliency, brownfields, redevelopment. I think that really gave us an insight of what you want to do and where you are heading to. I think there is a couple of precedents that you might want to look at. While we're talking about London, I thought automatically about the Olympic Games. So that was a massive brownfield that was ignored, and it was all about landscape as the base layer, regenerating local ecology, so on and so forth. One of my questions is, so what outcomes do you expect with this method? How do you see this in the big picture? You are collecting data, and what's happening next?
What I anticipate to have is something like a database, as Nicola has mentioned. And what I want to do is that the process will become a toolbox. So what I do as a toolbox. So for you can use it for just development, or you can use it as analysis of ecology, such as this always talks about the Hanura Ranges connecting the Waitakere Ranges. So we could look at some of the paths, and then say that site might be a note point for that path. So it could be a potential for a development as well as ecology, because of it's in the middle of nowhere, say, but it's in a good site to connect to other nodes. So it will be something like that towards a analysis of the site that give you what potential it contains.
So you're designing a method, really. Which is
so
interesting.
if I'm interested on developing a brownfield, so potentially I will go to your database and collect all that information. from your method and take it from there.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that
Something like that, yes.
okay?
Yes.
Or if you're a developer, you may go to the database and decide which site to buy.
That is prime piece of land. Because you are still doing these under the landscape architecture umbrella. What kind of design solutions do you expect? So like if we think about the next step, so we have that database accomplished in a very successful manner, and you want to test all that data that you collected into a design solution, or potentially figure it out a couple of design criteria, whatever you want to do. So how do you see that coming as a follow-up of what you are doing?
What I sort of see is, say, if we find a site and we say that site's got great potential, but it lacks something, say like ecology. So we could say that site, say, can divide into a certain portion for ecology purposes that could be used for bird as a, what do you call it, network node to connect to the two ranges, and then the other part could be, say we want that for development, we want that because this could be, for consent purposes or anything like that. And I mean, that is just off my head how we were doing it, how we talked about it at the start of the project. Yeah. So I mean, with that, it could be things like, if you don't want to divide, it could be things like green roofs or green walls for as ecology, and as well as like a bird stock, that kind of thing. So that's so far that's what we
sounds good. Sounds good. It's very hard to judge it as a method because we are not really seeing any outcomes yet to test it or trial or reflect on. I think that deep down will be very important to define that criteria about the weighting process that you have there. And I think that you are grounding it at the moment probably too much around ecology. There is other factors that you might want to take into account. There's the social aspects as well that can play an important role in what you are trying to do. So defining criteria, but finding also other doors that at the moment you might be closing them down very quickly. So that would probably be my major feedback.
So I'll look into the social side of that.
Well, just an example. It might be other stuff.
That is the columns that I talked about. Is ecological.
Yeah.
Social,
you have the cultural side as well.
As well as development.
Look, I found that really interesting in an area that I am reasonably mystified by.
It's like, ooh, numbers.
Yeah, I always find GIS work quite challenging, and it's a mixture between art and science, I guess. And so, look, Kevin, I thought first off you did a great kind of ground setting of what the issues are and why and how serious things are. And I did have down for myself as a question of you talked about development and ecological potential and how it might be used. I think you've just answered that question successfully now. But I do wonder whether it seems to me you've got such a strong idea in mind of this tool and how it's going to be developed. As a relative layperson in this area, I'd be interested in maybe you exploring better what you postulate there, how it would be used. You set up broadly how you think it might be used, what it would be a tool for, but I guess I was swimming a little bit in that perhaps. I thought your coverage of the various methods, the three methods, the Delphi method, etc., was fascinating, and I really enjoyed that. I thought it was really interesting because I didn't actually know this. Understanding a bit more about how values are set, and it's kind of almost how experts get together, and of course they input into this model. And how
it's highly subjective.
So it's a mixture between the objective setting of a machine which you're formulating and the subjective, and how that, I think that was really interesting. It's the first time I really grasped that, so I was really interested in that. All this is really pertinent right now with this whole new unitary plan, and you may be aware there's a guy who you probably, Kyle, I can't remember his last name, at the Northern Council, he's a GIS guy, and he's been doing some GIS modelling on brownfield sites and their redevelopment potential. And he has been torn to bits in front of the panel. Currently he was testing the unitary plan, but in a good way, because his information is so important for development of the cities. That's why what you're doing is so interesting. But I guess I'll be very interested as you move on to the next stage, as you decide what are the values that you want to test. I appreciate it from what I've gathered that there's a multitude of values you could test, but it might be interesting to choose some and then go on that journey.
I do have some, some basic ones are things like locale, ecological sensitive sites and all that most of those are proximity related.
Yeah.
So that will have to go through the network, work out, how far away from those kind of sites are, that kind of thing. It's altogether about 9 so far, the criteria that I've set.
Cool.
Yeah. I didn't show it because I sort of showed it in the last
yeah, sure.
last
No, I
talk.
appreciate that.
I don't have much to add, but I think again it's a very well defined study and very well researched, as all of them have been that we've seen. And I too was mystified and fascinated by all the numbers and also really interested by the way these sort of very instrumental things can be really impressive. But one needs to also recognise there is a strong subjective element in there. Through the design of the tool and also then the inputs that go into it. I'm interested in a way, I guess, how you can think about the whole thing in relation to ecological thought and the way that ecological networks are radically differentiated and how the kind of complexity and the chaos of ecological systems then suggests that you do actually need to do that kind of multifactorial analysis. So I think there's you could do a really beautiful kind of little piece of introductory writing around the kind of concept or theoretical framing of the ecological, but then I can see actually that this is really where you're very comfortable and that maybe that stuff just sits within that anyway and doesn't necessarily need to be raised. Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
But good, really, really interesting project, yeah. And great to think that it could actually be a tool that can be put into action, yeah. Thank you.
Any comments from Nicola, would you like to say something?
I already said something. Yeah, I mean it's...
So do you think there's a...
Yeah, he's designing a tool, yes.
Yeah.
So do you think this could be a problem working with practice, with Babbage, who kind of, want something, they want to kind of develop this sort of tool, and then what he needs to do, for a master's, for
the time being, I don't see any problems with that, because what Babbage, the way I understand it, what Babbage wants is just inventory of the brownfield sites in Auckland. And he will do that anyway, so, and then for his masters he will do another level on the top of that with different ways of evaluating the brownfield side, which will be...
I guess there's one thing we think about, whether or not your particular project needs to be brought down. There seem to be in the world two different kinds of people. People who get this, and people who don't.
Probably. Yeah.
And do you need to, reframe it somehow, or put it in terms where a lot of other people do understand it? There's people who don't really understand the background working of the tool.
That's probably the next one where the data is integrated and we can simply just show this, I think, because if we show that how it works, probably that would be the people who don't understand. You can see.
Well, I'm just worriing. Maybe you don't. Maybe the tool is for people who understand it, and you don't need to kind of, because sometimes the trap is to simplify something so others understand it, yet they're still mystified.
Yeah,
And so
I know.
they'll still kind of come to the table and say, "Oh, it seems really cool, and it's got math behind it, and it looks like there's numbers that count, they add up, so it must work." But
Yeah,
they don't really believe
I know,
you anyway.
I know. Office 13 is like that.
Yeah.
You're so used to the earlier versions, that the latest version, you just don't know where things are.
So you just go, maybe that's a position you take, that, I get into it to such a technical level that this then needs to be, the people I'm communicating with are only a certain group of people. They don't need to be everybody.
Yeah.
Or you say, this is a tool I think is really useful for maybe landscape architects or designers, urban designers, or whatever it is, as a big broad group, and I'd love to be that person to communicate how it works for them and their, so that they can use it in some particular way. And their understanding of how you use it is important to them, not necessarily technically how it works.
Actually, there are, it might be not the mainstream in the landscape architecture, but there is certainly a stream people who do that type of work. And, you saw from the background research, and I'm sure some of the authors are landscape architects, so I don't think it's a problem. There is conferences about geodesign and digital landscape architecture. People propose these types of projects. Like it's similar to what, computation and architecture. In landscape there is similar. So I think this it is just within the bigger landscape architecture, then it's about the computational side of landscape architecture. Valid.
I think what makes it work is clearly it's a place of comfort for him. It's a place of expertise, and that comes across really well.
He definitely feels comfortable with computation and stuff.
That came across.
Which is good.
Thank you.
Good, thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.